Hello, I'm Daniel, and welcome to the Emunah Project. In a continuing series of basic and major texts of Judaism, we're going to talk now about the Shulchan Aruch. We talked about in a previous video the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara. These are commentaries with respect to the oral law. Not everything was written down in the Torah. God tells us what to do. He left out of the written part the how-to. The how-to was passed on orally for 1,000 years. It started to be written down first in the Mishnah for a couple hundred years, which was basically a commentary, and then the Gemara, which was a commentary on the Mishnah. The Mishnah alone is 63 tractates. Not all of the Mishnahs have a Gemara, but a lot do, a lot don't. We're talking many, many volumes of Talmud. So to find an answer, a rabbi would have to go all over the place. So someone 400 and I believe around 450 years ago, Rabbi Yosef Caro, wrote the Shulchan Aruch. This was a codification of a lot of the practical laws of the Talmud, what to do about kosher meat, what to do about salt, what to do about milk and meat, and all these laws. He went through them and made the Shulchan Aruch. May his memory be blessed. It is, and what I want to do is I want to give you a brief little insight. I won't take too long about why these things can be very complicated and why things grew from a Mishnah to a Mishnah Gemara to a Talmud to a Shulchan Aruch. 400, however many years ago, Yosef Caro, we have here, Hilchos Melicha, the law of salt. In Chulin, in Masechta Chulin, this is this thing over here. This is the Talmud talking about not sacred things that have been set aside, but profane, mundane things. For example, meat that was consecrated from the altar was consecrated. Regular meat you're having for a steak, profane. Chulin deals with that. Now, in Chulin, it says that in order to extract blood from within the meat, biblical prohibition against consuming blood, in order to extract that blood can't be extracted without salt. So the Talmud says you have to salt the meat. So Yosef Caro comes along in his Shulchan Aruch and explains further and sets it down so that we'll know. So we have here in Hilchos Melicha, Tzarich l'hadiach habasar. You must wash the meat. You have to wash the meat kodem melicha, before salting. You have to wash the meat before salting. 5 words. 450 years ago, some odd years ago, Yosef Caro wrote those 5 words. The entire rest of this page and all of the next page are the rabbis commenting on that, because as helpful as it is for Yosef Caro to say you have to wash the meat before salting, it only raised more question. We know in the Talmud, in Chulin 113a, that Shmuel says, without the salting, you're not going to extract it. But why do you say we have to wash? Not it's a good idea to wash. We have to wash. Well, one rabbi says, there's surface blood. And if the process is to extract the blood by putting salt on it, you may be, chas v'sholom, pushing surface blood, visible surface blood, which is a problem, into the meat. Another rabbi will say no. See, if that blood, that surface blood, starts to dry, it forms almost like a crust, and it prevents the salt from interacting with the blood in the meat. Another one says, well, forget about drying. If it's even slightly wet, what'll happen is you put the salt on that grime, and the salt will start filling up with the moisture from the surface, and it won't be able to interact. It doesn't have the strength to draw out the salt. The other one says the washing is required to soften the meat in order to have the blood flow out more efficiently. What another rabbi will say, the meat will soften, but if you don't do it enough, the blood will come. If you don't wash it, if you don't soften the meat, the blood will come out too slowly. And what you will have is blood starting to come out and then being reabsorbed into the meat. That's just from the first two words. Tzarich lehadiach, you have to wash. And then now, what's washing? Does washing mean rinsing? Does washing mean soaking? Does it mean scrubbing? And what about the water? Is the water lukewarm? What if the water's cold? What if the water's really, really cold? What if the meat stays in the water for over 24 hours? These are all practical questions. Salt. What kind of salt? Table salt? Coarse salt? Rock salt? How much salt? How long does it have to salt? 20 minutes, half hour, an hour? What do you have to salt it a little bit? Do you have to pack it on? Does it have to be a layer? One side, both sides? What happens if you only salt one side? What happens to all of these comments on both sides of the Shulchan Aruch? Those are these people, these rabbis over the centuries, bringing out the law, bringing out the law. Now what happens, as you can see, this goes on, and eventually the Shulchan Aruch became itself unwieldy. So what happened in the middle 1800s? 1865, I think. What happened in 1865 was that Rabbi Shlomo Gansfried did a concise version of the main points, the main practical points of the Shulchan Aruch. He in fact made a small, like a Reader's Digest version of the important points of the Shulchan Aruch, and it is the Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. Many Orthodox homes will have a Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. And the wonderful thing about the Kitzer is you don't have to schlep around many volumes of Shulchan Aruch, let alone 60 or whatever volumes of the Talmud. Schools have it, rabbinical schools have it. It's a very practical guide. So we have from the Talmud, we have Yosef Caro, 450 or whatever years ago, writing the Shulchan Aruch. Then we have further comments. It started to get very big, and the Shulchan Aruch, which was a tightening up and a more concise form of the practical halachas in the Talmud. Then we have in 1865 Shlomo Gansfried's Kitzer Shulchan Aruch. So I hope this wasn't too boring. I hope this wasn't too dry for you. But it's important to learn these texts because when someone goes to a rabbi for advice on a legal point, these are the texts that one goes to find out what the answer is. In the old days, you didn't go to a rabbi for theological advice. It was presumed that everyone was Orthodox. What you had was a practical problem, and they would go to them with that problem. He was able to look it up and provide the answer to the person. A rabbi is basically a lawyer, only instead of secular law, he does Halakhah, religious law. I hope this was of some help. Until next time, on behalf of the Emunah Project, I'm Daniel. Thank you too much.